Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with all of you and to pinch it for Michael Van Hecke, who I consider to be a friend. The ICLE has been a tremendous support partner. I've learned a ton in working with the ICLE now for a number of years. Unfortunately, you're getting me. So I'm second up to bat here after Michael, but it's a real pleasure. Indeed, and also great to make a short trip back home to California, as Chris said. I'm a proud product of Archdiocese of Los Angeles Catholic Schools, and when a few years ago when I asked my dad why he wanted, or why he and my mom actually sacrificed so many things, right, to send me and my 4 siblings through Catholic schools. So my dad's a migrant farm worker from Mexico, and early on in my education, and maybe you can advance the slide here, Chris. Early on in my education, I got this sense that what we were getting was an incredible privilege. Our Catholic education was an incredible privilege. And while I certainly don't want to downplay the gifts that Catholic education has to offer, I will say I think we're in a pretty pivotal moment with respect to education, especially Catholic education. And so the premise really of this talk actually is a bit sobering. And so just to reveal, here it is. This is if there's takeaways from my reflection here with you all and with the opportunity to open it up to some questions here in a moment. The premise is this: an illness has befallen Catholic education. And it's actually been an illness that's been increasingly present now for, I would say, tracking back 7 decades, 70 years. Early to the middle part of the 20th century, I would say we had a major and significant turn in the Catholic educational environment and ecosystem that really, again, I think came from this illness, which I'll speak a little bit more about. But we have to reckon with it, and we have to engage in a proper diagnosis, I think, to be able to properly address it and engage in a conversation about renewal, what renewal means and why we need renewal. I still, though, even in the midst of that, right, what might be bad news, would with great conviction argue that the Church's vision for education and formation is still the best one that exists. I will say that again. The Church's vision for education is the best for the world. And it's actually, I think, the antidote for the illness that's befallen society and culture more generally as well. And there is a pathway, I think, to renewal. And so there's so many, as Chris alluded to, right? There's so many missionaries, frontline missionaries, school leaders, teachers, diocesan officials, bishops who I think, seeing this, right, have embraced the task in the times that we're in to courageously go and move forward with, engaging where things are at, the illness, and then developing, right, a response to that. And so there is a pathway, and I hope to share today just some of the elements of that pathway that, again, aren't exclusive to, let's say, me or my work, or Denver or one particular context, but I think perhaps a collection that I would summarize for you as if we had to, again, engage in a project of renewal, of Catholic educational renewal, these are some of the key elements that are hallmarks of that renewal as well. So this is where my dad worked. This is Ventura, California. He worked for a produce company that picked greens, and in particular, he worked for this company when he first arrived when he was 17 up till about 3 years ago when he retired finally. So you can tell my dad's my hero ultimately, and there's an incredible wisdom that I think comes from people that have worked the land for so long, right? Next slide. So I don't know how many of you recognize what plant this is or what greens? Yeah, the chard. Yeah, the Swiss chard. Yeah. This is one of the ones that his company produced, and I bring this up because it was actually a really providential conversation that I was having with him when I started as superintendent back in 2018 in Denver. right before COVID really just rocked our world, right? But really providential because it actually gave me an incredible visual that I want to use with all of you as we think about, the illness and then the response to the illness in Catholic education. But as we were talking, I said, I'm just trying to figure out how do we navigate the needs and the challenges and the realities that are present in the Catholic schools in Denver. And then so he said, well, think about it this way. So, when I was, he eventually worked up to being a quality control manager for his company. He said, when I would walk the fields, I would always look for the browning leaves. Naturally, my question was, well, what did the browning tell you? That you need water, more water? Do you need more pesticide? It was actually, no, the browning indicated to me not so much that there was a lack of water or a lack of pesticide or, again, pest control. In fact, what that indicated to us was the need to actually look in the soil and identify the conditions of the soil. Because you could spend a ton of money, just watering or overwatering, which would kill the plant or the crop, or even pesticide, right? And we know, ultimately what that would do. But it's not until you do a deep analysis of the soil, and with the Swiss chard in particular, you have to have the right levels of nitrogen and potassium in the soil to be able to properly yield a good crop, a plentiful crop. That's just really stayed with me as just a great visual for the work that I think has to happen in the Catholic educational space as we look at the challenges that Catholic schools are facing. Because we are seeing a lot of browning leaves. This is what a browning Swiss chard looks like, right? And again, for someone like me, right, that it doesn't have like the wisdom and the knowledge of my father and others who have worked the land, right? It would be easy for me to say, well, yeah, that plant's dying, just give it some water or, whatever, fertilizer, what have you. But this has been, I think, in some ways, the schizophrenia that's been present in Catholic education. We've tried to throw responses to surface level issues, declining enrollment, closing schools, institutional viability questions and challenges. Now, those are all important things that in the life of a school and in a school community you have to tend to, right? But I would argue that actually the thing that we have to reckon with is below the surface, below the soil. It's in the soil, of culture, of society, of the foundations of this school, of a particular school. And really, I think it comes down to this question of an issue of a crisis of identity that we have not yet come to terms with. And I think now, finally, it seems we are, with the leadership of bishops and certainly their teams around them, but individual communities as well that have, looking at the landscape, have said, no, there's something off here just about why we exist and what we do and our understanding of that. There is a great book that was written in 2020, actually, just released right before the pandemic hit. Some of you may have read this, published by the University of Mary, From Christendom to Apostolic Mission. And I believe it actually gives us an incredibly spot-on diagnoses of our current state. So a lot of really the premise of this illness also comes from the perspective that's given here. The general premise is this, that we exist in a post-Christendom society. So Christendom does not exist anymore as the foundation that we can rely on in culture and society in the United States. Now that's also very sobering and a hard pill to swallow. But at some point, we could say, right, in U.S. culture and structures and systems in the United States, there was a strong Christian ethic and moral foundation, right, that undergirded politics, society, media, culture. Right? It's why the Ten Commandments, for example, right, with Charlton Heston was such a popular film. You're going to be hard-pressed to find a very similar dynamic today, right? It's antagonistic and blatantly hostile in many situations. This is what I'm confronting in the Archdiocese of Portland today, which in some ways, right, the Portland metropolitan reality is one of the most hostile to faith. So in that context, right, Christendom, that is, right, a vision of culture and society and government and politics and law that has Christian roots and origins is no more. And the author would say that we now live in a time that actually resembles other times in the church's history that we can brand or term as an apostolic age or an apostolic moment. That is a time where there was little to nothing in terms of human recognition or prestige that came to the church, where in fact the church seemed like the underdog. The church was persecuted. And to consider that for a second, right, that actually helps us to understand, okay, the Catholic school as we know it today really was built and constructed during the time of Christendom for the most part. A lot of the Catholic schools that many of the dioceses across the country have inherited were erected or established during a Christendom time and moment. But there's a really actually unique element of the U.S. Catholic history that I think is a piece of our own tradition that we've lost. And that's that if you go back to the late 19th century, in fact, our Catholic school, the parochial school in particular, was established in an apostolic moment in the United States. It was bishops that in Baltimore, when they got together for these first plenary councils of the church, said, we need Catholic schools to counteract the pernicious influences of the rampant anti-Catholic ethic and presence that was just rampant in the United States at the time. It was also very anti-immigrant. So late 19th century, late 1800s, what are we talking about? We're talking about who's coming to the United States? The Irish, the Germans, the Italians, right? And so there was this strong nativist movement that was very Protestant, very anti-Catholic, that was present in the United States. And in the face of this, there's this apostolic response led by who? By the bishops who are saying, we need Catholic schools. We need schools for the children of our families, of our faithful. So that's already ingrained in our DNA, right? But the reality is this, and I think the author sums it up really well, right? That we societally now are in a situation where the culture's vision, its moral code, its ideal of a good person, is seriously being contested. And the society is going to go into crises until what? Until its original vision is either reconstituted or overthrown, and another overarching vision takes its place. So if this is the context, right, of what's happening in the soil of society and culture, then what is the Catholic response? Unfortunately, I would say that our Catholic schools, in many ways, have continued to establish in a Christendom mode. That is, with the assumption that the prevailing culture is still friendly and favorable to the project that the church has for education. And in an unassuming or in really perhaps even ignorant fashion, I think many schools have just gone with the tide and the current of the secular culture and secular society. And in what ways? Well, you see this in terms of what has become sort of the hallmark of Catholic schools today, right? Very generally speaking here. And again, obviously there's exceptions. So academic excellence, is that not one of the things, right, that we always attribute to the success of the Catholic school? Fantastic. There's no doubt in my mind, right, that our Catholic schools have this strong tradition and legacy of providing a rich academic formation for young men and women. But unfortunately, that has become the primary concern, right? According to the standards set by academia, or according to, right, the standards set by the workplace, utilitarian outcomes, useful outcomes. In a lot of ways, the Catholic school has embraced the same obsession that I think has befallen modern education in general, which is that education is only good insofar as what? It's useful for you, for your progress, for your upward mobility. And as a young man growing up, I can tell you, right, I had great teachers, and I have a tremendous set of gratitude to my Catholic educational experience. I wouldn't be here, honestly, if it wasn't for that. But one of the messages, key messages that for me, the son of migrant farm workers from Mexico, that I heard and I received over and over again was this, right? Whether intentionally or not, but this is what I grew up with. That the value of my education was going to be contingent on what? My ability to progress beyond where my dad was. That was it. To get into a good high school, to go to a good college, to get a good career, to not end up working in the fields like my dad. Again, I can tell you, my dad is the best man that I know. And going back to this conversation that I had with him early on as a principal, I asked him, Dad, why all the sacrifice to send me and my 4 siblings to Catholic school from kindergarten through 12th grade, right? I was expecting to hear, well, I want you to have the opportunities that me and your mom didn't have, or for you to be able to make it in this country, to chase the American dream, etc., right? His response floored me. His response was actually, I want you to have an education that will free you to come to know God and discover the purpose and vocation for which you've been created for. If you ended up working in the fields like me, but were a better man than I was, that would be the mark of success for education. It's in his simplicity, right? It was an incredible articulation of the heart of the church's vision for education, just in that statement alone. But unfortunately, again, as I noted, right, to just come to terms with the illness, the Catholic educational establishment, if you will, has lost sight of the highest pursuits or aims of the Catholic school, as articulated by the church herself. 2018, this is a little-known study, but the University of Notre Dame Sociology Department conducted a study on alums of various forms of education, classical schools, Catholic schools, homeschooling programs, public, and then just private prep schools, ages 18 to 24, and asked them a series of questions. I'm just highlighting a couple. You can actually find this study, and maybe we can provide a link to everyone if you're interested in reading further. But little known, and I was scouring the internet to find the electronic version of this, but there's a sobering reality we have to come to with respect to what we find here. But this is just a snippet here of some of what was produced. Again, a comparative study, and really questions that these alums of these schools were asked with respect to what are your thoughts concerning faith and religion and engagement in civil society and marriage and family life and a lot of the controversial issues. But this right here was striking to me. Grads or alums of a Catholic school, you would expect to have a strong foundation in faith coming out of their time, right, in a Catholic school. Well, if you see here, right, the Catholic column is the tallest column here. So this is just young men and women ages 18 to 24 that were products of a typical or conventional Catholic school. The far right in the yellow is those that went to what are considered Christian classical schools, whether Catholic or non-denominational. The tall line is the percentage that have indicated that they have doubts about religious beliefs or have doubts. Actually, it's the same target. There was supposed to be another one there. Doubts about their religious beliefs. The other one that I meant to include in there was the extent to which their faith guides their decision making. And the conclusions of this study were actually really sobering. Again, from these sociologists who were not connected, right, with either of these forms of education, in a very tight way, but nonetheless commissioned to study just the impact of different forms of education. But the findings were this: while slightly above the median in areas such as college preparation, Catholics tend to trend with the secular schools with respect to all other things, all other outcomes. The study declared that public, preparatory, and Catholic schools are significantly less likely to influence students to believe in biblical principles and church teaching on matters such as marriage, cohabitation, premarital sex. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. That's a crisis. That's a crisis. I mean, perhaps in a brash way, one could say that our Catholic schools, right, are failing in kind of the essence of what they've been established to do. We have to reckon with the conditions, right? There's been a lot of really well-intentioned efforts that we see playing out and present in Catholic education in so many different ways. But we're at a unique moment again today where we have an opportunity to, I think, properly reclaim the church's tradition and renew it for the times and the conditions that we're in. Because as there's another really great book that if you're really interested in studying the trajectory and the history of Catholic education, Heart of Culture by St. Thomas University in Minnesota, the Catholic Studies Department, Harbinger Institute, I think has done a marvelous job of tracing the church's educational patrimony. But just to pull something from there, they note that civilization lives and endures through time not mainly by geography or ethnicity, but by an educational process, the handing on of a cultural tradition. Education is the answer. For the church's evangelizing mission to continue to renew culture and civilization, we need our schools at the forefront, engaging in and with the church's mission of evangelization in the formation of young men and women that can renew culture and renew society, that can reverse the trend and properly address the brownie that we're seeing largely happening. This is, I think, what has been repeated even by the Holy Father Pope Francis. 2 years ago, there was this also just incredible document that was released, The Identity of the Catholic School for Cultural Dialogue, that hits on these points really squarely. That the church has this duty to educate. For what purpose? Because she has the responsibility to announce the way of salvation to all people. This is the primary aim of the Catholic educational apostolate in the church. It's to announce salvation in Jesus Christ to the world. This is it. The essence of, and so the church is bound as mother to give her children, our children, an education by which their whole life can be imbued with the Spirit of Christ. This has direct implications for what happens in the classroom. But the illness then, if I can describe it just in one phrase, or one word, right, would be the following. It's been a disorder of purpose or a disorder of aims. There's another, Catholic higher education is another topic that, we would need hours to unpack even further, right? But I think it's also an important aspect of the Catholic education puzzle, if you will. But there's a great book written on the current state of Catholic education, which, if you're in Catholic higher education, if you're interested in Catholic higher education, would highly recommend it. What we hold in trust, rediscovering the purpose of Catholic higher education, notes the following to talk about this illness. When mission statements, convocation speeches, curriculum reform, research agendas, strategic plans, and budget priorities mute the school's distinctive primary claims and replace them with secondary claims, we face the leadership problem of teleopathy. This is the word that's used for the illness, by which limited goals take on an ultimate importance. By overemphasizing limited goals, those who suffer from teleopathy tend to disorder what is primary, causing mission drift in their institutions. So teleopathy is this word that the authors coined that puts two Greek words together. Telos, which means purpose or aim, and pathos, which means illness. So the illness of what? Disorder of what? Aims and purpose. Highlighting or elevating the secondary or the tertiary over the primary. This is, I think, what we have in front of us in Catholic schools. It's been a disorder of aims, right? Where fill in the blank with whatever secondary, tertiary goal or aim has replaced the primary. The primary being what? Bringing young men and women to encounter with Jesus Christ, the Logos, the defining principle and reason for all things. Providing them with an education in wisdom and virtue. This, again, has been the message repeated by the Church time and time again as the primary aim. But instead, right, what have we seen happen in Catholic education? Well, it could be, again, the allure of the prestige of academia. It could be just academic excellence as defined by, the standards of the secular world. College and career readiness, technology, athletics, academic freedom, more in kind of the Catholic university space. All those can be, right, false idols that get elevated over the primary, if not properly ordered, on the foundation of the church's mission. So in some ways, the response has to be for us to what? To reorder the project of Catholic schools, to flow from the heart of the church's primary aims for those schools. I would say we find the pathway then to renewal. So if the disease is the disorder of the purpose or the aims, then the church provides us the response, really. So a lot of this here, again, I would say I feel like I'm plagiarizing from the church herself and from many of these educational movements that have recovered the heart of the church's teaching and charter for education. The first is really, again, to come back to this essence of why do we exist? What do we do? When I talk to teachers and school leaders, this is the best, I think, practical way I have to describe to them the difference that the church is proposing for us when it comes to educating our young people in our schools. And it's usually in the form of this question, this thought exercise. If you were to strip a school of any and all symbols of the faith, take all the crucifixes off the walls, take all the Bibles and theology books, anything that would characterize that school as Christian or founded on the Catholic faith, is there something that a stranger who walks into the school would observe or see that would lead them to conclude that something is happening in this school that's radically different than the public school across the street? Because actually the essence, I would say, is beyond the crucifix on the wall. The essence is beyond, the veneer or the aesthetic aspects of the faith. The best, again, I've come up with is a science classroom. You can have a science classroom in a Catholic school and in a public school. Let's say that you have students who are looking at cells under a microscope. And for all extent and purposes, in terms of raw materials, right, and even just the exercise of looking through a microscope, it's all the same, virtually the same. But what's going to happen in that learning experience? The students are naturally going to ask the question, as they're looking at the cells, what? Why is this the way that it is? Why was this created this way? For what purpose? I mean, these are just the natural inquisitiveness of students here coming out. In a Catholic school, in a public school first, there's very little that a teacher can respond to those questions or give to those questions, right? Or it's very shallow. It might be, well, this is the result of a cool cosmic coincidence, the result of randomness, or go and talk to your parents about that. We're just focused on, you identifying the parts of the cell and completing this worksheet and getting this right on the test. My hope would be that that's not the response kids would get in a Catholic school. The knowledge of the cell is important to have. The grammar of the composition of creation is really important to know. But what is the teacher doing and engaging with students in that moment in those questions? The hope would be that they're leading the student out of this learning exercise to see the invisible realities that are present in the visible material things that they're engaging with. So a response, we would hope to hear in the Catholic school would be, this cell, right, was created by a loving God who actually has created all of this, the universe, and this cell that you're seeing here in front of you, to woo you to himself, to lure you into a relationship of love with him. That they would see in all creation, right, the mark and the imprint of a God who loves them and has created all things to be in relationship with them. This is, I think, again, in the simplest way I can possibly pose, the essence that the church proposes is at the heart of her educational tradition, right? That it doesn't just stay with the raw, the material, but it moves beyond to open the eyes of our young men and women to be able to have a vision beyond just the visible, beyond the physical, which is so critical to what? To the heart of the church's mission here, which is that when she says, right, and this is from an encyclical written in 1929 by Pope Pius XI, as he summarized the end of education, that there can be no true education which is not wholly directed to man's last end. That actually the task of education is to form our young people for the things that they are to do here on earth, the people they're to be here on earth, so that they can attain the end for which they were created. We, in the Catholic educational mission, already naturally has this supernatural dimension to the work of the school, to the task and the project of education. We have higher aspirations and pursuits than just earthly and temporal things, and that's why when we just limit it to college and career success, academic excellence, without due regard for, actually, Mom and Dad, we have a higher vision for your child. And we know you have it too, because if you ask any parent who sends a child to a Catholic school what they ultimately desire for your children, for as much as that they might articulate, well, I want them to go to a good college and have a good career, at the very heart, I think the fundamental answer is, I want them to be happy. I want them to experience happiness. Is that not what every parent desires for their child? This, I think, then gets us to a point where we open the door to be able to tell them, you know what? We have an answer to the question of happiness. That's Jesus Christ. Let's talk to you about what that means, and then engaging students in a project of education that leads them to discover ultimate happiness and encounter that happiness. But it gets stifled when it just gets limited to temporal and human outcomes. This is the teleopathy, I think, that we hear being described. The Church, again, has given us even hallmarks for what this should look like, right? The Holy See's teaching on the Catholic school captures all of what I'm describing here. But if I had to personally synthesize the 100 years of the Church's intellectual tradition and teaching on this, it would be in the following way. It would be to say that the Catholic Church calls Catholic schools to be sanctuaries of education. The renewal that's happening in the United States, and I had the great fortune this past November of being part of a panel with at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops fall plenary meeting, discussing this topic specifically. But I can tell you right now that our bishops across the U.S., and I know Bishop Van is one of the ones that believes very deeply in this, as is my Archbishop Sample in Portland. The bishops across the U.S. want to reclaim their church's mission. They're desperate to reclaim it because they see the trend, right, that the data has been showing. And they're coming to terms with there's something that's missing here. We've done a good job of producing really good and excellent students that go on to do go to great colleges and rewarding careers. But even in just that brief meeting I had in November and in talking to some of the bishops, I can tell you, they're desperate to continue to renew their schools so that at the end of the day we can say that the best product of our Catholic schools are faithful men and women who are in love with Jesus Christ, who are in love with the Catholic Church, and are going on to be what? Great husbands, great wives, great mothers, great fathers, who are contributing to society as faithful, moral Catholic people. Now, how do we get there? And I think this is where, this renaissance that has begun to take place and emerge, right? By recommitting to this, forming this sanctuary of education. Many schools across the country have begun to really see and bear fruits with this. But this is, again, this is the simplest way to express hundreds of years of the Church's own teaching on this subject. Sanctuaries of education supporting the domestic church, the family. Pope Pius XI actually had a much stronger phrase with respect to why the Catholic school exists. He said it exists to be an institution subsidiary to the family. In fact, the Catholic school exists primarily for the family. to be in partnership with the family to support the first school, which is the school of the family. And I think, we talk a lot of times about primary educators and wanting to respect the role of primary educators. But if we're truly serious about that in times that we're in, we actually have to get back to what does that mean and how do we empower parents to really embrace that primary role. The homeschool movement, I would argue, in my mind, is actually one of the beautiful manifestations of the primacy of the family and the domestic church coming alive. They're a significant aspect of the renaissance that's happening in Catholic education today. And I think, and I have seen an experience where when a diocese can properly support and nurture, and parishes can properly support and nurture homeschooling efforts, even if it's just by giving them space in their parish to be able to start cooperatives or be able to engage in community, there's just a beautiful, beautiful boost that comes and is provided even to the parochial school at the same time. Too often there's an animosity that exists between homeschooling and between parochial schools, an unnecessary one, in fact. We're all an expression and form of Catholic education. That also means we have to expand our notion of Catholic education. Catholic schools, brick and mortar schools, K-12 schools, universities, I would argue are just one element of the apostolate. In fact, the church has a more total and holistic view of education that also, I think, encompasses parishes, parish life. I might even go further and more boldly in saying that the extent to which we're going to continue to see parochial schools thriving and alive in our diocese is going to be contingent on and dependent on the extent to which parish life is thriving and dynamic. The renewal of Catholic schools has to happen alongside the renewal of parishes and the transformation of parishes. Without that happening, right, we're essentially just inflicting kind of a wound, I would argue, in the sanctuary. Because Pope Pius XI would describe the sanctuary of education as this harmony between the church, the home, and the school. That, and he goes even with stronger words, that if not in harmony, becomes destructive of each other, he would say. I mean, again, we can spend time talking about, right, how we've seen that happen in so many ways. So the roadmap, right, reclaiming the church's charter, reclaiming her vision for education. The next big piece that I think has become a hallmark of this renaissance and renewal is when we restore the primacy of the Eucharist and worship in our school communities. Whether that's students are starting the day going to Mass, right, on a more frequent and regular basis. Many schools have made the pivot to do what? To have daily Mass offered for their communities, or at least more than just once, or more than once every month. But the way that I think that the way we worship has a lot to do with how we are effective in our mission. If we can't get right worship of our God right and correct in our schools, there's always going to be just something significant and crucial missing. But I'll tell you, those schools that have embraced going to daily Mass or more frequent reception and offering of the sacrifice of the Mass, that has been such a significant aspect of the renewal that's taken place in school situations. The elevating of the role of the spiritual father. We unfortunately are seeing a trend where, in fact, there's been a lot of conversation around the brokenness of the parochial school model in particular, and that we need to perhaps even move the pastor away from leadership and authority over the parish school to allow the experts to come in and run and manage school programs in the school institution. I can't think actually of something that actually inflicts a more graver wound to the mission of the Catholic school than the sidelining of the spiritual fathers, who are the proper authority actually established by the bishop himself. So that speaks to then the spiritual fatherhood of a local bishop. John Paul II wrote that the bishop, the local ordinary, is the father of the church in its totality. And sadly, I think, as I've reflected with other bishops, what we have seen in our times today is an abdication that's taken place, whether an imposed one or a self-imposed one, of the spiritual fatherhood in our parishes and even in our diocese to some extent, where the task and project of education comes from the threefold mission of the bishop. So when they're ordained to teach, to govern, and to sanctify. Teaching, educating, is one of their primary duties and responsibilities before God and before the church. And so we need bishops and priests to really take ownership of that and be empowered and supported to do that. And when that doesn't happen, then we have parishes and school institutions that experience a wound of abandonment, let's say, that then leaves, right, the school in some ways naturally, right, just, okay, well, we're on our own to figure it out. Let's figure it out. But the role and the authority, the teaching authority of the spiritual father, the bishop and his priests around them, is critical because they are the direct link and tie to, again, who? To the ordained ministry of Jesus Christ and the proper order and authority of the church. So we need, actually, instead of sidelining our pastors, we need to find ways to empower and equip them to own the role that the church herself has established for them, and for their authority over a school community. Chris mentioned this a little bit, but the recruitment, retention, and formation of leaders and teachers is a significant aspect of the renewal that we've seen happening. We can't get this mission off the ground and bearing fruits without the people on the front lines, right? And I won't belabor the point, but there's been some significant developments nationally in this space here. Chris mentioned the Catholic Education Credential Program. This is a first of its kind established by the Institute for the Catholic Liberal Education, which we were very fortunate to pilot in the Archdiocese of Denver. They just graduated their first national cohort earlier this year, this calendar year. Denver just graduated its second cohort, local cohort. That's 60 teachers that have gone through, right, through a authentic Catholic educator formation preparation program that gives them the richness of the church's tradition and charter with then the practical tools to be able to implement in the classroom. But we've seen other examples of this. The Archdiocese of Boston had success with the St. Thomas More's Teaching Fellows. They started their own version of a Catholic formation program to address the need of having solid teachers, well-formed teachers in the school. And one of the last projects that I was involved with in the Archdiocese of Denver right before we left is one of the significant questions, and there's been a working group of dioceses engaging in this conversation, in fact led by the University of Notre Dame, but one of the significant challenges in front of us is how do we make working in a Catholic school sustainable from a financial perspective for teachers? And housing has become a significant issue and challenge, especially in many metropolitan areas. So Denver right now is piloting they're calling it the Cabrini Teaching Fellows Program, but it's a residency program that is looking to, in its idealized form, bring in cohorts of 30 teachers that they would commit to providing housing for 3 years, and in turn provide communal life, human formation, and then allow them to receive their credential through the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, their teacher formation program. If we could figure out a way to support teachers in this way, through housing support, through some of the basic human needs that would allow them to actually view working in the Catholic school as something that's more sustainable, I think we could see a significant shift happening. Because I can tell you right now, and this, to what extent it may be the case here, I'm not sure, but in Portland, I'll tell you, so many principals say we don't know where to find teachers, and we can only keep teachers for a couple years. They're either really young or they're later in their career, because we can't pay them a competitive wage to maybe other forms of education, and housing costs are significant. So this, I think, is something that we'll see. Minneapolis, St. Paul is also doing some creative work in this space, but a really important aspect of that. Goes without saying, but curriculum pedagogical renewal is a significant hallmark of the Renaissance. And here we are talking about a deep analysis of the extent to which even curricular standards, curricular materials, textbooks, actually are different or not different compared to public education or secular education. Sadly, I think what we see in many Catholic schools is that they have just adopted, right, the local public schools curriculum, or Common Core state standards, or textbooks, right, that in some cases teachers are having to pull out or tear out pages because there's things that are antagonistic towards the faith and incongruous with the faith. That shouldn't be happening. So thanks be to God, there's now emerging just great Catholic publishers of curricular materials. The Catholic Textbook Project out of Ventura is one. We have TANF, Memoria Press. There's so many publishers now that have been developed, that have developed great curriculum that can be used, right? But also that believe deeply in the Church's mission and provide a really sound, right, pedagogical foundation for students and for teachers, ultimately in implementation. But again, I think this is actually probably the most important and crucial piece, right? It's hard to say because the others are so important. But what we actually, the diet of intellectual formation that we feed students either will give them the sense that this Catholic business is a veneer, or really, truly provide them this integral formation where they won't see daylight because they see, right, that the church's mission is deeply embedded with her intellectual formation and tradition. And so the renewal piece is really here, especially in dioceses that have embraced this, comes down to curriculum guidelines and standards that actually, for example, reclaim history versus teaching social studies. The pseudoscience that is social studies and has become in modern education, right? To be reclaimed and restored for the study of and the story of human history and civilization through the lens of the story of salvation is one of the biggest, I think, game changers that you could possibly see in a school. When all of a sudden, right, instead of like this schizophrenic view of history, of just looking at eras, disconnected eras, right, or even engaging in this critical analysis of history through the lens of more modern sensibilities and understanding, without actually recognizing the drama that plays out, right, that is animated by salvation history. This is one space that, when I speak to diocesan officials or colleagues, I say to spend the time in working on renewing and changing from social studies to history makes a huge difference, So just by way of an example. The last piece I'll say this is one of the hallmarks of renewal that we've seen now too in embracing the Church's vision is also a radical commitment to serving families with children with special needs. And here I'm talking about intellectual disabilities and children with learning exceptionalities that perhaps have seen the door of a Catholic school close to them. The more that the Catholic schools become spaces of refuge for families that have children with intellectual disabilities and special needs, the more actually the school culture begins to be transformed, so that we can also open our view to that there's actually other aims beyond just utilitarian outcomes that are valuable and important. Because all God's children deserve an encounter with Jesus Christ. And if that's the primary, then then we should be opening our doors to children with Down syndrome, to children with severe autism. And there's actually ways that we can support them. Unfortunately, even the public educational project of supporting children with special needs has failed. And there's many Catholic families, at least in my experience, that are clamoring for more openness to this. There's been a great effort by an organization called the Fire Foundation. It was started in Kansas City. A local chapter emerged in Denver. But they're a nonprofit that was erected specifically to raise funds to support schools in opening their doors to children with special needs. And when local communities can take that on like that way and support, then the infrastructure and overhead costs that are needed to be able to provide the necessary supports, it allows, I think, for flourishing that perhaps is very unexpected in some ways. So just to underscore a couple of other points here. one of the tasks that, in my experience, I have seen as really crucial is that as we embrace these elements of renewal, there has to be an unyoking of unnecessary burdens, too, that have been imposed on the Catholic educational system, if you will. And I would say that three of those would be the following. Many dioceses have self-imposed state licensing requirements for teachers and school leaders. This gets to the piece of teacher formation and credentialing, right? But I know California is a state where there's some states where there is a law that says that even private schools have to have teachers licensed by the state. California is not one of those. Oregon is not one of those. There's actually many states in the union that don't have that restriction on even private schools. So many dioceses, coming from a place of, they wanted to ensure that there was quality in their schools, quality professionals in their schools, self-impose these requirements. Unfortunately, what we know now is that state licensing programs and standards have become incredibly antagonistic to a Catholic vision for humanity, a proper Christian anthropology, and even a proper understanding of education. Just rampant with secular humanist expectations. So to reclaim that and to say, actually, we're not going to limit ourselves, it also makes good business sense, right? Because now all of a sudden we are expanding the pool of people who we can bring in. And oftentimes there's many men and women looking to make mid-career changes and get into teaching who previously perhaps might have been told, well, you can't teach here if you don't have a state education license, and then they have to jump through all these hoops to get that. Where now, right, with the advent of formation programs or even homegrown programs in dioceses, it would allow us actually to tap into a greater number of faithful men and women that could serve as teachers and frontline missionaries in our schools. There's many misaligned accreditation systems that exist as well. This is a really big topic and one that is also a topic of discussion with the bishops, I will tell you, at the national level. But to break away from broken secular systems that impose secular standards and now have also been infiltrated with a disordered understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion as kind of a hallmark, too, for the success of a school. And embracing, actually, perhaps through the role of the bishop, to be able to have the bishop accredit his own schools with a process that gives him the confidence that the school is living faithfully its mission. There's some really innovative work that's beginning to emerge here in different spaces. But to unyoke ourselves from accreditation as another measure and standard of quality would also enable a flourishing and a renewal. And the last is, this technology arms race, as I like to call it. But we have more and more research that's beginning to emerge now on in fact, the disastrous project that has been the integration of technology in the lives of young people, especially children, and the impact that this is having on their psychological and even neurobiological development. That it's actually physically changing the structure of the brain. And so, which is getting in the way of attention and even the development of important just human skills like empathy, for example. So many schools, though, again, because it almost be like little brother chasing big brother, public schools have just been completely run over by ed tech. Feel that one of the standards of quality is to ensure that they're one-to-one or that they have all the bright and shiny technology objects, right? The more our schools actually, and to be clear, I'm not anti-technology. I think technology has a role and a place in a Catholic school setting. But I would also say that what you're seeing in the renewal movement in Catholic education in the U.S., those schools have embraced a technology light approach, where actually they have seen, right, that because of how much technology has consumed the life of young people, the school becomes a place of detoxing them from the technology and technological environment that they're in, right? And here I'm talking about primarily screens, smartphones, tablet devices, right? That are just constructed to rewire the brain in a particular way. So this is another key piece that I think requires some significant and bold commitment. But you can jump a couple slides here. But despite the browning, again, there's this great movement happening. I'll close with just the signs of hope here. This is a map of, so the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education is a national organization, if you're not familiar with them, that is supporting schools that are looking to embrace the church's vision and mission and these aspects of the pathway to renewal that I described. These are all the schools across the country now that are affiliated with ICLE. It's over 200 schools. They have now schools in Colombia, in New Zealand, affiliated in New Zealand and in England, I heard recently, right? So it's growing. And again, I think led by dioceses and bishops, in some respects led by small parish schools, led by a homeschooling cooperative that wants to support the local pastor. But it's spreading all over the country, thanks be to God. One of them, I think, and this is just fresh on my mind because I was just visiting with them yesterday, but the Chesterton Academy also has emerged as a key player in this renewal. So the Chesterton Network is a network of Catholic high schools that's emerged starting in St. Paul, Minneapolis in 2008. And since then, they now have over 60 schools across the country and internationally as well. In fact, I believe they're opening a school in Iraq really soon. But also Catholic high school education is probably one of the most significant and crucial aspects of this movement and renewal. And where it's been overrun even more than K-8 education, I would argue, by the teleopathy, right? But the Chesterton Network has begun to establish itself and supporting local communities. In the Archdiocese of Portland, you heard the description, the entire western third of the state of Oregon, from Washington border to the California border. In 2 years, we're going to have 5 Chesterton high schools there now. Thanks be to God, right? And all starting from local communities, pastors, families who are saying, we want this. We want to start off. And where are they primarily forming their communities? In parishes, right? Under the leadership of the spiritual father, and then using empty or vacant parish space to be able to give way to this growth and this renewal. But I noted earlier, there's a lot of support now too that's emerging for homeschooling families. So virtual programs, the Colby Academy is a free curriculum that's been created for families that want to provide a Catholic education, homeschool education to families. But there's many others, right? This is just one that I happen to be really familiar with. And then the Regina Caeli model as well is a hybrid approach. Provides a kind of a brick and mortar setup 2 days a week, and then 3 days a week families are engaging in homeschooling, the homeschooling project. So that's probably a great place to bring this to close here. And locally here, I was really heartened in just hearing some of the local efforts that are underway already through, Dr. Bersano's work, the local community as well, the Camino schools, the Santiago Trade School. Some of you are all here. I've been following you all. It's a great project.
You need a house built, they'll do it.
Yeah. Well, and again, you're seeing even the emergence of this too, right? So a lot of people are we don't have enough time to get into the nuance of classical education versus Catholic education and liberal education and so forth. I would say that the church's tradition is a liberal educational tradition that has classical origins and roots that we have to reclaim. But even then, right, the foundations, these principles, right, can emerge or can result in the emergence of Santiago Trade School or this Harmel Academy in Michigan, right? So there's great space for innovation as long as we have the right order and are grounded deeply in the church's principles. So ultimately, again, I think this is the heart of what the church proposes, and I thank you for your time. I don't know if we have time or want to open it up for questions, but thank you.
You did such a great job with the congregation. We don't need questions.